He works on shorebird conservation, recording and public land management and water policy in Northeast Florida. He serves on advisory groups for the GTM NER up here in St. Johns County and the Florida Department of Transportation's Florida Transportation Plan. He also serves on the conservation team of the Central Florida Water Initiative, an effort that informs water policy throughout the state. Prior to his work in Northeast Florida, he worked for 6 years on Audubon's Everglades Restoration Campaign, biology, and other courses. So, without further ado, Chris, if you want to share your screen, you can start your presentation for us.
All right, I will I will do that.
Awesome.
I have 3 screens, and PowerPoint is weird when it goes into presentation mode. So we'll see if I can do this properly. Let's see. Share screen. Yep.
Can I just stop sharing?
3. It automatically does it for me. Let's see. Can you see a title slide for a presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, let me test. Now my screens are all, I don't know why. When you go to share a screen for presentation, then PowerPoint reacts funny. All right, and Zoom. Let's see, what happens if I do this? Change the slide, okay?
Yep.
Awesome, look at that. Technology working as intended. All right, well, thank you very much for the introduction, Blair. Thank you for having me at your JayChat. Is that what it's called? Your meeting? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Thanks. I am glad to be here and talk about shorebird conservation work that I participate in Northeast Florida. So I work for Audubon Florida, and we do a lot of different types of work throughout the state. We have centers where people can visit and see nature and learn about nature, like Corkscrew Swamp down in Naples. We've got the Center for Birds of Prey that helps rehabilitate injured raptors and release them and educate folks about raptors with birds that can't be released that live at the center. We have a whole bunch of coastal staff throughout the state, a lot in the Gulf of Mexico that work on shorebird conservation. And we also do a lot of policy work to help make sure birds and wildlife and the places they need are protected. My job's kind of split in between the two. I do a lot of policy related work, and I also do some shorebird conservation for the birds that nest in Northeast Florida. So I'm going to talk mostly about that today. Give you an overview of some of the different shorebirds. I'm sure you've been out to our coastal areas and seen a bunch as a birder club. So I'll go through a bunch of birds that you might see out at the beach, and then I'll focus on the imperiled species, the ones that really need protection that happen to nest on our beaches. So a lot of birds spend time passing through Florida, this long peninsula on the Atlantic Coast Flyway. It's a very important habitat for foraging and for resting. But we have a handful of species that actually nest and raise their young here and complete a very important part of their life cycle. So I'll focus on those, and I'll be glad to take questions afterwards during whatever is good for y'all. I'm flexible. I can try to leave chat up somewhere too and pay attention to that if I'm capable. All right. So Northeast Florida, we have a bunch of different habitats. We've got very dynamic coastal habitats, especially with, you can just see in this picture, we'll have upland areas that have pines and hardwood forests that have rivers and creeks running through them. They'll come towards the coast where the land gets a lot flatter and more open. We have a lot of salt marshes. The closer you get to the ocean, the water becomes saltier. And so most of the waters you see, like in this picture, We'd call them estuarine. They're in between fresh and salt, and that's very important for creating unique habitats. There's a lot of estuarine species that like to live in those habitats that aren't quite freshwater, aren't quite saltwater. We have barrier islands all along the coast of Florida, Anastasia Island, for example, where you have kind of a separation from this island and then the mainland. So all these cool areas in Northeast Florida help to produce the diversity that we see when we go out birding. And you can see on this slide, we have over 300 bird species that we can see in Northeast Florida. Also, I'll just point out in this picture, there's 2 inlets where water comes in from the ocean. We've got Fort Matanzas. Can you see my pointer when I put it up on the screen and point at things?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So, whoa, there it goes. Down at the bottom here, we have Fort Matanzas, and we'll look at these in more detail. And this is the St. Augustine Inlet up there. And we'll focus and look at a lot of inlets today because inlets are highly productive areas. Lots of nutrients in the form of, goes up through the food web from algae into fish. And, we're talking about shorebirds. So the important part that we're looking at is little fish that they can eat. So as you start to learn more about ecology, and really quickly, I'll mention my background. I went to school for biology at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, and I got a bachelor's degree in biology, and I kind of focused on zoology and the study of animals. And then I went to graduate school at Florida International University down in Miami, and I was in a herpetology lab, so we studied reptiles and amphibians. Even though reptiles and amphibians were the species that we studied, a lot of the work we did was really just studying ecology, how nature works. And this slide here helps us understand how we can have such diversity out at our beaches. We might think of the beach as one habitat type, and there's the ocean and there's some sand, and you get the seaweed, that often comes up on shores as the wrack. We'll see pictures of that later. And if you think about it, you might wonder, well, how can we have so many? Why do we have so many different types of birds in this one habitat? And to us, it might look relatively monotonous. It looks kind of the same. But this slide is showing you, when you think about it in more detail, there's the dry parts of the sand. There's the parts of the sand that are covered, that are in the swash zone, where it comes up and it goes away. So sometimes they're covered, sometimes they're not, and it's very shallow. There's the deeper water parts of the ocean, and then also in the lakes and rivers and streams around in the estuaries. And so you can see these birds lined up along here, and the size of the bird, the size of their beak, the size of their feet, the size of their neck, all enable them to use different parts of this system. And so that's the ecological term we have here, resource partitioning. We're breaking up into little parts the resource, all the food that's available to them. And so you can see flamingos can access things that live deeper in water than oyster catchers, kind of in the middle, that still like to get things out of the wet sand. They can only go so deep into water to get their food. And then the little peeps, the other smaller little birds that are farther up on the shore, that have short little beaks, they'll be up in pretty much the dry sand, or that swash zone where the water moves. So you get different species all using this same habitat because they're taking advantage of different parts of the resource, and that way they're not directly competing with each other. So that's a cool thing when you're out birding to think about. You see all these different birds, and it's like, why is that bird that way? Why does it have a long neck? Why does its bill shaped that way? Why are its feet? That's another cool thing to look at. Feet, are they webbed? Are they not webbed? how long are the toes, and it all breaks down to how they use the environment. So cool thing to think about while you're birding. Now I'll quickly go through just a few birds that you might see while you're out at the coast. This one is a plover with a black belly, so I really appreciate the name, black-bellied plover. It's easy for herpetologists like myself. So herpetologists, in case you don't know, are people who study reptiles and amphibians. So I'm super into snakes. I still am, but when I was younger, so I learned all the different snakes and frogs and toads. And then somehow I ended up getting a job at the Audubon Society, and they wanted me to know birds. So it's been a little bit of a challenge. But we have in these pictures, I'll mention the next few were all taken at Fort Matanzas National Monument, that area right there at the Matanzas Inlet. Semi-palmated plovers are super common in large numbers out on the beach. You can see a couple 300 of these little guys out there at a time. This is a greater yellow legs. We also have a lesser yellow legs. They look very similar to me. I don't know, maybe you're a better birder than I am. But very similar looking birds. After studying this picture for a while, I got from a volunteer, I have decided it is a greater yellow legs. But if anybody out there is good at IDing greater versus lesser, you can take this picture and go at it and tell me if I'm wrong. Of course, what people refer to as our St. Augustine Air Force that are out here in St. Johns County. Pelicans are really awesome birds. They're cool when they're just sitting there or flying in formation, and then watching them dive at incredible speeds to catch fish. They have those really big bills that can hold really big fish. So again, they can go out deeper and get a bigger fish, which means, they're using a different part of the resource than terns, smaller birds that eat smaller fish. Speaking of terns, this is a royal tern. When they're sitting down on the beach, you can kind of see why they're royal terns. Their feathers stick off the back of their head a bit, maybe like they're wearing a crown. Royal terns, you'll see I won't mention them for nesting in St. Johns County. They nest up in Huguenot Memorial Park, but we often get them on our beaches down here. This is a whole bunch of red knots. This is a federally protected endangered species that we get. We're lucky enough to get spending a few weeks of the year on our beaches refueling as they go basically from the bottom of the earth to the top of the earth and back again. These birds are some of the best long distance migration birds on the planet. So they're really cool in how they travel and the energy they have to expend. So they have to spend a lot of time stopping and refueling, and they do that on our beaches here. This is, as you can see, if you can see my slide titled at the bottom there, the picture. This is a bunch of birds. I don't even know if I know all the birds that are in this picture. This was taken by a volunteer out on the Gulf Coast, actually. But they're mostly birds that you see along Northeast Florida's beaches, some of them more or less common. Y'all do a lot of birding. I'm sure you're used to the codes, probably for shorthand. But like down here, in case you're not too familiar with that, it says AMOY, AMOY. That's the four-digit code for the American oyster catcher. MAGO, marbled godwit. WIILL is short for the willet. And my recommendation, if you want to go look at shorebirds and you're really interested in keying them out, IDing them to species, go during the summer. Don't go in the winter. They're all gray. They all look the same. You have to spend a lot of time analyzing bill length and some other body features. It can get pretty tricky. I love these birds, black-necked stilts. I first saw them down when I was working in the Everglades, and I'd see them in the canals in the Everglades agricultural area, and the dirt on the side of the canals is really dark black. And when you drive by, you can see the white part of the bird and its legs, and it was really hard to actually see the top part of the bird. So it was a kind of a striking sight. But they've got these incredibly long legs, that cute little bill. Around here, I see these mostly up at Nassau Sound, where the border between Duval and Nassau County, a place called Spoonbill Pond by Nassau Sound we have blackneck stilts that nest up there. These are common along our beaches here in St. Johns County. Reddy turnstone, as the name turnstone implies, they spend a lot of time turning stuff over, looking for food along the beach. So you can use that behavior to identify them. These are some of my favorite birds. I don't see them terribly often. I've seen them the most down at National Wildlife Refuge. I know a lot of the Audubon societies around here. Y'all might have taken a trip down there. American avocets, they have those super cool bills and really pretty colors. But we'll get into the birds that are really where Northeast Florida is really important to these birds, birds that raise their families on our beaches. So first, thinking about the beach, it might not seem like the most interesting habitat, and when you just look at a picture like this, you think, where are birds living? Where are they raising their young? And in fact, a picture like this might actually have a whole bunch of shorebird nests, and you might not know it, because as we'll see here in a few slides, the shorebirds don't build nests like we often think about with bird nests. They just make little scrapes in the sand. So it's a lot different for shorebirds, or what we'll call beach nesting birds, BNBs. This is it. This is their habitat. They'll go out and have nests there and raise their young just on these wide open beach habitats, which is cool. And also, with how much humans use the beach these days, kind of dangerous for the birds. And so that's what we'll focus on a lot here, is how to protect these birds that are nesting on our beaches. A lot of the work that's done throughout Florida's sandy coast, which is most of the state, is what we call the Florida Shorebird Alliance. We have 12 different local partnerships working on beaches throughout the state of Florida. So we have a St. John's Flagler partnership. Here we have one called the Timucuan Partnership, which is Duval, Nassau counties. So I work with those two partnerships. And we'll have state parks and federal land managers like Fort Matanzas National Monument, county governments participate, a whole bunch of volunteers, just people who are interested in protecting shorebirds. That's the vast majority of our partnership. And then we'll have a few staff involved. Myself, I'm paid staff for Audubon Florida that helps make sure the partnerships move along and work properly. And then the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has staff that I co-lead these partnerships with. We have a map. Oh, we'll get there. So back up really quick. The main things we do are surveying and monitoring, looking to see where the birds are at, keeping counts of their nesting activity, trying to estimate how many there are and how many chicks are being raised to fledge, where they can fly away from the site. And then we do a lot of stewarding. So I'll talk about that, where we have volunteers out at the beach sites, making sure there are no negative interactions between the beachgoers and the shorebirds. This little map just shows you we have 12 partnerships, so 11 and 12. That's where I work. If you're interested in shorebirds and the conservation activities we're doing in Florida, you can go to the website here, Florida Shorebird Alliance, flshorebirdalliance.org, or you can just Google Florida Shorebird Alliance and you'll find it. And another thing you can do is each month, FWC puts out a newsletter called the Rack Line. And you can subscribe to that and you get all sorts of updates about activities that are taking place, volunteer opportunities, and just updates on how the birds are doing throughout the state. To give you an idea of the amount of work that's done and how this has been a growing effort over time. Back 20-something years ago, we had some Audubon chapters in Sarasota, Tampa area working with some FWC staff on some new projects to help birds that were nesting on rooftops. Some of these birds, mainly least terns, as they've lost their beach habitat, some of them have been moving to gravel rooftops to nest because it's kind of like a beach habitat up there. So we had some volunteers in FWC working together to protect shorebirds, and that model of Audubon chapter members and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission staff working together was repeated in 2006. They did it here in St. Johns County. And then pretty much that grew over time and the amount of participants, and that's what turned into the Florida Shorebird Alliance. And now that we have 12 partnerships throughout the state. So it's been a really rapid increase in the number of people participating. And you can kind of see that in these numbers that the metrics here for like the number of surveys that have been done from 2011 was, around 1,100 to almost 5,000 9 years later. So that just shows how many more staff and volunteers have been participating in this work. And so we'll look at the species that we have that are nesting here. They're all, so we have a couple words we use. They're all imperiled. Imperiled is more of a subjective term, just means they're in danger. Almost all of our shorebirds have declined 50% to 90% population loss throughout the 20th century. So, last century, the numbers of almost all these birds crashed. There was a lot of hunting. There was a lot of people moving out to the coast and destroying their habitats. A whole bunch of things happened, and their numbers were really plummeting. So many of them are critically imperiled. They're in a lot of danger, and their populations are low enough to where they get put on endangered and threatened species lists from the state or from the federal government. There are some that are not quite at that point. They've lost a lot of population, but they're not low enough to qualify. So even though we call them imperiled, they're not listed by the state as of yet. So I'll point out which one's which as we go through all these different species. Couple things to pay attention to. It's kind of cool about their ecology. Some of these nests, some of these birds nest kind of alone, solitary. They'll be relatively close to other nests from birds of their species, but they're spread out a little bit more. So we call those solitary nesters. And then we have colonial nesters. So the birds on the right side of the screen are colonial. They're big colonies. They'll just be jammed in there all next to each other, hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of birds in a relatively small area. And if you notice on the left are it's a Wilson's plover and an American oyster catcher, birds that are kind of standing upright. Those are birds we would call shorebirds. I'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. And on the colonial side are seabirds, terns and skimmers. So the shorebirds are colonial nesters and the seabirds are, sorry, did I say that backwards? Shorebirds are solitary nesters and the seabirds are colonial. So what's the difference between a shorebird and a seabird? All you have to do is think, where does it get its food? Seabirds get their food from the sea. Shorebirds get their food from the shore. So the seabird here on the left is a black skimmer, and they go out and skim. I think I have a picture later of one skimming across the surface of the water. They have a lower mandible that's longer than their top mandible. It's pretty cool. So they get their fish out of the sea. So it's a seabird. The Wilson's plover on the right, you can see it eating a crab. They eat crabs and worms and all sorts of things in the sand and the wrack, all the algae that washes up on shore. So it gets its food off the shore, so it's a shorebird. All right, so the most plentiful bird we have nesting here is the least tern, and so it says threatened in red. So it's a state threatened. The state of Florida has it on a list of threatened species. And why we care is it gives us certain legal protections that we can take to protect this bird while it's nesting on our beaches that we wouldn't have if it was not threatened. So there's a few marks here you can look for when you're at the beach, since we have a bunch of birders. You have no field marks that you can look for. They've got these cool white triangles on their forehead. They have a yellow bill with a black tip. The least tern, as its name implies, it's the smallest of the terns, so it's still a decent sized bird, around 9 inches, but compared to Caspians and Royals and all the other terns, it is smaller than them. When they are young, as you'll see all the pictures, all these young birds are incredibly cute and fuzzy when they're downy, when they have the feathers that are not connected together for flight. So the downy feathers, they look all really cute and fuzzy. So on the top is a downy chick. It's a really young chick with these feathers that are more that are not capable of flight. On the bottom, the flight capable juvenile, you can see its feathers on its wings are starting to look different. They're the more mature adult feathers that will allow it to fly. Least terns. On the Florida Shorebird Alliance page, there's these really cool resource books. I can, if anybody's interested, I can provide links to the publications that talk about each of the species and how they're doing. And each year we try to update those with estimates of what the birds are doing. So you can go get these fact sheets for all the different species. Here I'll just highlight a couple things. The least tern, we've got a little over. This was from a couple years ago. I've not updated this with the most recent data, but it's very similar. A little over 7,000 pairs. So that'd be 14,000 birds flying around on our beaches. But it actually turns out least terns, most of them aren't on the beaches. 55%. When this data was completed, this was like 2021. There's a date on here somewhere. 55% were on rooftops, which is interesting and cool, but also not great. It means that they felt that their beach habitat was so poor or non-existent that they've had to find other places to raise their young. So the good news is these birds are capable of adapting and using these habitats. The problem is they like roofs from the 80s, the 1980s, that were tar and gravel rooftops. We don't make roofs like that anymore. So the roofs they're using, as they get older and they start to leak and they get replaced, they're getting replaced with more modern, energy efficient, cool roofs, which is great, except for it doesn't provide habitat for these birds. So where are all the rooftop nesting least terns going to go is a big question when we're trying to restore beach habitat for these birds. The maps they have in these books you can get, publications from Florida Shorebird Alliance, show you where they nest throughout the state. You can see some dark green, St. Johns County and Duval County. Right now, don't leave this minute, but maybe after this talk, go to the beach, go to Anastasia State Park. In particular is easy place to get to and look at, and you can see least terns out by the ocean, kind of the swash zone where the tide's coming up. And you'll see a bunch of least terns, and you'll see several that are holding fish in their mouth, like this guy. Those are males that are looking for females for breeding season, and they will run around with this gift in their mouth and try to find a mate. It's really funny to watch. I don't know, I feel bad for them when they're going up and showing their fish to this nice young lady they've picked out on the beach, and they're confessing their love and undying commitment, and then the female just looks at them, turns around, walks away, flies away. But the males are not they're not discouraged. They just look around, find another female, and go up and offer their fish to her. And so it's this fun little thing to watch going on the beach right now. Eventually, they'll find mates, and in a few weeks, we'll start seeing eggs in shorebird nests pop up on the beach. So you can see in this picture, a shorebird nest is not the most impressive thing. It's what we call a scrape, because they just go and literally scrape out some sand. They'll do a little more work. Sometimes they'll kind of press their chest in a circle and give it a little bit of a bowl shape, but that's it. It's just this little depression in the sand. They'll lay their eggs. You can see the eggs are speckled, kind of like all the sand and the shells around them, so it hides the eggs. And you can see the young here that come a few weeks after we have eggs will get young. And they're also kind of speckled and match the sand, so that the eggs and the young are camouflaged, which is great if you're just worried about predators, because the predators come by and maybe they don't see you. But we are in a public beach like Anastasia State Park, and there's people walking around. When the people walk near a nest, they'll scare away the parents. Parents will fly away, and now just the eggs or the chicks will be there. And eggs, they can't move. The chicks, their defense is to just hunker down and not move. And if you can't see them and they're not moving, people might step on them. So it's good. Camouflage is good against certain predators, but it's not good against just beachgoers walking around on the beach who might not see you and then step on you. So that's why we have to have this Shorebird Alliance and people working out on the beaches to help protect these nests. And we'll get into how we do that in a minute. Here's just a super cute picture that you can see. You'll need a good scope or a zoom lens on your camera to get these kind of pictures, because we have to stay a safe distance away from the birds so we don't disturb them. But this was a picture from, I think, Fort Matanzas, probably about 10, 15 years ago. Just a cute little video we can watch of some least terns running around at Anastasia State Park. You can see a bunch of them are huddled under that little piece of vegetation sticking out there, because it's hot on the beach in the summer and shade is very important. So they like to hide in the shade. The black skimmer, we also have nesting. We hadn't had them nesting for about 30 years. And then a few years ago, we got a few nesting in Anastasia State Park, and we get about 5 to 10 nests nowadays. We're hoping it will increase, but the black skimmers are a little skittish. They don't like people so much, and the beach isn't that big. So we just can't get really big numbers or big colonies of them, but we're working to do the best we can. You can see the long lower beak that they use to put in the water and pull fish out as they skim across the surface. I'm always impressed that they can fly just above the surface of the water without crashing into the water or getting their bill out of the water. They can fly at this perfect height right above the water to catch fish, and they can do this all without having any eyes. At least that's what it looks like. When I'm out at the beach and I look at these birds, you can see, okay, they do have eyes, of course, but they have these dark eyes, and they're in the black feathers on their head. And a lot of times I'm looking at these birds, I'm just always perplexed by the lack of eyes. Some little skimmers, not afraid to take on big fish though. And then you can see the flight capable, they have to go from an egg to pretty much the full size of the adult throughout the summer. That's why they have to eat such big fish. It's a lot of energy that has to go into these birds to get them up to be big enough to migrate. Some of the birds might go 100 miles. Some of these birds might go hundreds, closer to 1,000 miles. Some of the least terns that migrate to the Caribbean. So these birds they gotta grow up, and they gotta put a little bit of fat on so that they can migrate. So they have to eat every single day. Kind of like a teenager. So Black skimmers, we had 3,000. So we have fewer black skimmers than we do least terns. Occasionally these will nest on rooftops, but not as often as the least terns. You can see we have some light pink, red colors in Northeast Florida. We have a little bit of nesting up here. We have a few that nest up in Nassau Sound, and the few on Anastasia State Park, but that's it. Royal terns. So this doesn't say threatened, it says MBTA, which is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Pretty much all birds, it's pretty safe to just consider. All birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which protects them from harm. You're not allowed to just go out and kill birds and possess birds. And so that's good. But they have less protection than the state threatened birds as far as our ability to keep people away from them during nesting season. If you want to see royal terns, thousands of them nest. We only have one nesting site. It's at Huguenot Memorial Park, but the good thing is there's tons to see there. Thousands will nest. You'll get hundreds and hundreds of chicks out on the beach. It's really cool to see. So I recommend you go up there to Huguenot Memorial Park this summer. They're a little later this summer, June, July. There's a picture I took a few years back of all the different chicks standing on the edge of some sand. They have some dunes in Huguenot where most of the birds nest, and that's good. It keeps them away from people. Okay, now we'll look at a couple shorebirds. So these nest. So the birds we've looked at so far nest in big colonies. The birds we'll look at now have fewer nests, a little farther away from each other. An interesting piece of ecology, the seabirds, they get their food from the sea. So when you're a chick, how do you eat? You have to have your parents go to the sea, catch fish, and bring them back to you. So that's why in these big colonies, the chicks just hang out there and the parents bring food back to them. But the shorebirds, they're nesting right next to the shore and they eat at the shore. So it turns out that shorebird chicks, they're what we call, they're more precocious. They, from a young age, they get up and start running around and they go with their parents to get food. So they'll go, maybe they're nesting at the very beginning of the dunes. They'll run down with their parents to the rack line where all the algae and stuff washes up and hunt through there for little things to eat. So the chicks are a lot more mobile, which is cool. Makes it hard for us trying to protect them on the beach because they're running around all over the place. The ones we have here, the American oyster catcher, this cool tuxedoed bird with the bright orange bill and the orange and yellow eyes. And you can see a couple chicks on the bottom there. These are also state threatened and have a little bit more protection. This is some nesting up in Nassau County on what we call a shell rake. It's a whole bunch of old oyster shells that get pushed up. We're not exactly sure if it's boat wakes or what hurricanes or storms what create these originally, how natural they are. But we've got these long piles of shell, and the oyster catchers like to nest. You can see how hard it is right there. That red arrow is pointing at 3 oyster catcher eggs in a quote unquote nest on this shell rake. And interestingly, oyster catchers almost always have 3 eggs. Most of these birds, it'll go from royal terns, most frequently have 1. A lot of the other birds have 2, 3, 4, 5. Oyster catchers almost always have 3. Here's a pretty little oyster catcher from Julia's Island, a little island we'll look at in the middle of St. Johns County. And it's got bands on it. If you're out birding and you see these bands, I think this is I-9, what that band code is. If you see these bands, you can report them. And when you report them, you can also learn about the bird and where it's from and where it was hatched, where it's traveled. So you help tell part of the story by saying, I saw it in this location. And you can also learn its background and story and where it's been before, which is really cool. You might have those resources already. If not, let me know and I'll point you all to where you can report your band sightings. We've got, oh, this is a little fun fact here that you can learn when you read about them in the publications. Oyster catcher chicks in Georgia were observed swimming more than 800 feet across a river to access foraging areas with each tidal change. So, their nest was in one spot, but they wanted to get over to a different area to forage, and so they had to swim. So these chicks are very very good at swimming from a pretty young age. So that was an interesting observation. The other shorebirds we have are the Wilson's plover. They nest in large numbers northeast Florida. So we have about 25% of all the Wilson's plovers in the state. So we're a good habitats for Wilson's plovers here. If you're familiar with killdeers, they look very much like killdeers. Killdeers have the two bands across the chest. The Wilson's plovers have one band. Don't have another picture here, but this bird's most likely a male during breeding season, has the dark black band. The females will have a brownish, light brown buff band. Also, juveniles and non-breeding males will have the lighter buff. So if you see the black band, you pretty much know it's a male. If you see a black band and a light band together, that's probably a couple. If you see them during nesting season, they might have a nest. This says Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They are not protected by the state yet, but myself and Audrey DeRose Wilson, our bird what's her title? Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Florida. We gave a petition to FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, last year to list the Wilson's plover as a threatened species. And now they're going to go through their process. Takes a little while of reviewing that information. And we're hoping that maybe this year, or the beginning of next year, the Wilson's plover will be put on the state list of threatened species. And then we'll have a little bit more protection for them. Super cute chicks. They're little cotton balls on these long stilts. They can run around from an early age out on the beach. And you can go to Anastasia State Park and see these plovers, chicks running around in a couple months. Yeah, you can see at this time it was around a third, somewhere between 25%, 30-something percent any given year of the plovers that are in Northeast Florida. Really quick, I want to make sure I'm not taking up too much of your time here. Just this, we have some data now that we've been collecting all this cool data on shorebirds throughout the state for the last couple decades. You can see March, for the most part, the shorebirds start nesting in March. And by August, pretty much they're all done. You can see the snowy plover, which is only out on the Gulf Coast. They start nesting early. There's already snowy plover chicks on the beaches on the Gulf Coast. But they're pretty much all done in August. Whereas seabirds, the colonial birds, are just a little bit later. Most of them start nesting in April and can go through, the black skimmers especially can go through September. They nest a lot longer than the other birds. But we have all these species nesting somewhere in Northeast Florida. Sandwich terns, we have small numbers of at Huguenot Memorial Park. Let's see. I gotta start this. All right, this is gonna go. I can't control the speed. Overall, it's not too bad. There's a couple jumps that are a little fast. But I'll just really quickly. This is Summer Haven, an area. It's all filled in with sand now. The last couple of years, sand's been blown back into where it shows a river. So we're gonna have least terns nesting there. That's the very bottom of St. Johns County. This is Fort Matanzas Inlet. Just north of that, actually south off the screen on the one side of the road is where we have a bunch of habitat where we think the birds will nest this season. This was a spoil island. So when they dredged the Intracoastal Waterway, they kick a lot of the sand out. We cleared this off to make this a least tern nesting habitat. when they were when they got rid of Summer Haven's habitat a few years back. This is Anastasia State Park. We have a southern nesting area, central nesting area that right there that we're skipping over in this little presentation. And then we have oyster catchers and a few birds that nest right near the inlet at the northern part. That's a 4-mile walk if you want to go up there. This habitat does not exist anymore. It was called Porpoise Point, south of Volano Beach, and it is all eroded away. This is Julia's Island, little tiny thing, hardly any of it's dry, but we get oyster catchers, willets, Wilson's plovers, whoops, sorry about that, and least terns all nesting out there. These are just a couple little habitats where least terns will nest. These are actually like in by the shipping areas, and this is on the marine base. But there's gravel areas, and the birds go, oh look, gravel, let's nest there. But then this is Huguenot Memorial Park. This long stretch in the middle has pelicans. Brown pelicans started nesting there. We get about 100 pelicans nesting each year now, plus royal terns and laughing gulls. This is Little Talbot Island, where we have least terns, gull-billed terns, black skimmers try and are never successful, and a bunch of Wilson's plovers. This is the tip of Big Talbot Island and Spoonbill Pond, if you've ever been birding there. And that has least terns and Wilson's plovers. Across the Nassau Sound, when you go over the bridge, this is Amelia Island State Park. And we have least terns and plovers nesting there. Along Amelia Island's public beaches, occasionally we get least terns nesting. And then the last nesting site we have is Fort Clinch State Park. This is the top of Florida. This is the St. Mary's River in Georgia to the north. And we'll get some least terns and Wilson's plovers in that habitat. All right, I'll quickly run through these last few slides. What are we doing? What's the issue that the birds face now? They faced habitat loss and hunting. They still have, hunting, not so much anymore. Habitat loss, there's still some issues where they're losing habitat, but most of the coast has been developed. Right now, the main thing we focus on is predation and disturbance. And so lots of people love, like this little girl, to run through birds and make them fly. But, I've talked earlier about how they need to eat a lot of food and get up a lot of energy so they can grow and be ready to migrate. And if they're being scared every day and flying, they're burning up all that energy and they won't be able to migrate. I'll quickly mention there's a lot of predators out there, and we do a lot of work to try to manage the predators. That is just done by staff. We don't do that with our volunteers. But there's a whole bunch of predators. Some, like the coach whip snake on the bottom, are natural, native species that live here in Florida, and that's part of the cycle. But we also have like feral cats. There's a coyote. Those black and white images are from game cameras we put out to see what's happening, and those are oyster catcher eggs that are being stolen. There's dogs, which are usually friendly, but sometimes they get rambunctious and they run through colonies and can cause harm, and the birds scare and flush because they think dogs are predators. Trash can be a problem, so a lot of Audubon societies and groups will go out and do trash cleanups to help protect wildlife. This is a picture of some bridges up in Duval where I would drive by, and there was lots of filament from fishing lines hanging. And I called JEA, and at the beginning of every shorebird nesting season, I called JEA, and they put it on their schedule to go out and clean the fishing line off the power lines. But the biggest issue, and what I'll focus on here quickly at the end, is the disturbance from beachgoers being out there. And we have a big volunteer program with the partnerships to try to limit the harm that people do to shorebirds when we're all trying to share the shore. Because like I said before, you can't see the chicks, you can't see the eggs. If they were just down on the beach all by themselves, people would accidentally step all over them, and it would be very, very bad. Here's a picture of a beach you might be walking down, and you might not realize not only the eggs, these are birds, these are adult birds in this picture. But they blend in very well, and when they fly away, if you scare them, their eggs and chicks are so tiny that you just can't see them. Oh, and just quickly mention, the other reason we need to limit disturbance is we want the parents with the young. When the parents fly away, it's bad. Now the eggs and chicks are exposed to predators, but also the heat. The parents are over the chicks and eggs, keeping them cool during the summer. So when the parents fly away, they're exposed to the sunlight. If it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and a summer day, that can be really bad for them. So we have a lot of people working to protect the beach nesting birds. We go out and we post the habitats. We call this symbolic fencing. You can see anybody could get through there if they wanted to, but we put up signs, we put up twine, we put up flagging to say, stay out of this area. These are some volunteers working a while back in St. Johns County at Fort Matanzas, just starting to put up the twine and put up flagging and let people know, don't go in this area. There are shorebirds nesting. It can be a fun activity to go out and do some of these volunteer activities. These are just some pictures from working out on Julia's Island. You can see the fort and Flagler College. Law enforcement from FWC has boats and brings us out to where this guy lives in Julia Island to help us put up signs so that boaters who land in the area know not to walk through the nests. Look, there I am. I occasionally get out of the office and do a little bit of field work. But we run this twining and these fence and put up these signs each year to keep people away from the shorebird nests. Here you can see the signs also double as a little bit of shade, because shade is so hard to find out on the beach, and the birds, these Wilson's plovers, are enjoying the shade. This is up in Nassau Sound. We have these big no landing signs to keep people off of some of the islands that form in the middle of the sound that are great for shorebird nesting. Islands are really good nesting areas because there's not a lot of predators out there. So we like to have volunteers out by these areas to educate people about the birds, make sure people aren't entering the posted areas, and if anything bad happens, can call law enforcement, can call park rangers to try to help deal with it. The volunteers are mainly out there to educate the public, let them know about the birds, and make sure they're not disturbing the birds. This little guy is now attending the University of Florida, so it's kind of an old picture. It's my son who was helping me out one day. We like young volunteers. Sorry, Blair. Had to call you out for your great volunteer efforts.
My gosh.
Over the years. Back in the day at Summerhaven, your Audubon volunteer shirt. So thank you very much for all your work. Our volunteers help monitor, record data so that we have all this wonderful data that I've showed you so that we can tell whether or not the populations are declining or our activities are helping them. So really quick here at the end, I'll just say our goals for these species. We want to increase their population 10% over a 10-year period. 10-year period started a few years ago. So pretty much by 2030, we're hoping that we see 10% more of these species than we measured in 2020. We're trying to reduce the pressure on them through predation. We're trying to get volunteers out on the beach to make sure the birds are safe with beachgoers. We're trying to not only keep the existing habitat safe, but find new places to restore habitat to allow the populations to grow. And then we'll just end with this little video of some black skimmers. So maybe you can see this in a couple months out at Anastasia State Park. So these are two adults. One adult has a big fish. Who is that fish for? Oh. Chick wakes up, gobbles down that fish that's as long as the chick. I'm not sure where the chick put that thing. And then crawls right back under the parent to stay safe out on the beach. So, and at the end of this video, Jean zoomed out to show you she was really far away. That's why it's kind of shaky, even with image stabilization. She was way far away using a big zoom to prevent scaring these birds so that they could raise their family in peace. So these are the awesome things you can go see on the beaches. Blair can tell you all about it. You can get in contact with me if you want to know how to safely go see our shorebirds while they're nesting out on our beaches. Thank you very much for the time. Hope I didn't run too long for you.
You were all good. Thank you so much, Chris. That was an excellent presentation about some of my favorite birds that we have around here.